The table at Marcello's. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was in the middle of reviewing a $47 million infrastructure contract that my firm had been awarded 3 weeks earlier. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I remembered, Mom had switched phones again. Natalie. Her voice had that particular tone she reserved for conversations she'd already decided the outcome of. Warm on the surface, the way a lid is warm before you realize the pot underneath has been boiling for hours. I'm calling about your father's birthday dinner. I set down my pen. I know about the dinner, Mom. Saturday. Marcello's. Yes. That's actually why I'm calling. Boss. Your father, you know how he is. He wants the dinner to be a certain kind of evening. Sophisticated. His colleagues will be there, and of course Diane's brought her fiancé for the first time. Mom. And we just think it would be better if... Mom. Say it plainly, please. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, your father wants only successful people at his birthday dinner. You understand. There was. I understood perfectly. I'd been understanding moments like this one for 31 years. Before I could respond, I heard the phone shift, the rustle of it changing hands, and then my father's voice came on. Lower. More definitive, the way he always sounded when he wanted to close a subject rather than open one. Don't show up, Natalie. It'll embarrass your sister in front of her fiancé. He comes from a good family. We want to make a strong impression. I said nothing. The silence stretched between us and I let it. I'd learned a long time ago that the silence cost them more than it cost me. Natalie. Did you hear me? I heard you, Dad. I hung up. I sat for a moment at my desk. The desk that overlooked the 18th floor of a building whose top 3 floors my company leased. And I looked at the contract in front of me. $47 million. Federal government. My name on the signature line. Then I picked up my pen and kept working. Part 1, what they saw. My name is Natalie Osemensa. I am 31 years old. I run a government technology and infrastructure consulting firm called Meridian Group, which I founded 6 years ago in a converted spare bedroom with a laptop, a government procurement manual I'd borrowed from a public library, and exactly $3,400 in a personal savings account. Meridian Group currently holds 17 active federal and state contracts. Our gross revenue last fiscal year was $68.3 million. We employ 94 people full-time. I have been on Forbes' list of top women entrepreneurs under 35 for 2 consecutive years, though my photo has never appeared in those features by my deliberate choice. I requested text-only entries both times, citing security considerations related to our government contract work. The editor honored the request. My industry colleagues know my name. Almost no one outside it knows my face. This is not an accident. My family, my parents, my older sister Diane, my extended relatives who gather every Thanksgiving in my parents' house in the Fairlawn neighborhood of Akron, Ohio, they know me as something else entirely. They know me as the one who left a stable accounting job 6 years ago to play entrepreneur. They know me as the daughter who threw away a good salary to pursue some government consulting thing that nobody in the family has ever fully understood. They know me as the one who drives a sensible 4-year-old Honda, who lives in what they assume is a modest apartment. It is not modest. I simply chose a building without a recognizable address, who shows up at family gatherings in jeans and a blazer and deflects questions about her little business, with short answers and subject changes. They know me, in other words, the way you know a room you've never bothered to turn the lights on in. By the shape of the shadows. My father, Gerald Osemensa, is a man who measures everything by visibility. He came to this country from Ghana at 22 with an engineering degree and the absolute conviction that success was something you showed people. The car in the driveway, the title on the business card, the table you were seated at when other people walked into a room. He built a respectable career as a civil engineer, built a respectable house in a respectable neighborhood, and raised 2 daughters with the understanding that their job in life was to reflect his work well. Diane understood this assignment completely. She became a corporate attorney at 30, married a man who works in finance, drives a BMW and attends the right charity galas. My father has called her his true legacy at 3 separate family dinners that I was present for. I love my sister. This is the complicated part. Diane is sharp and funny and genuinely kind when the family dynamics aren't pressing on her to be otherwise. She calls me on my birthday every year without fail. She sent me flowers when I landed my first federal contract. She didn't know the size of it, only that I'd gotten a government job. She texted me 3 days ago about the birthday dinner. I'm sorry about this, Nat. You know how he is. I didn't ask for this. I replied, I know. Have a good night. Smile pretty for the fiancé. She sent back a single laughing emoji and I knew we were okay, the two of us, in the private language that exists between siblings who survive the same house. But Diane did not call our parents and tell them to invite me. Because Diane also understood the assignment. My mother, Constance, is softer than my father but not simpler. She is the kind of woman who delivers cruelty with genuine concern in her voice, who can tell you that you've disappointed her and mean it as a kindness, as a warning, as a gift even. She truly believed, I think, that excluding me from the dinner was the compassionate choice. That it saved me the embarrassment of sitting at a table of successful people and feeling small. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I hadn't felt small in a very long time. I had simply stopped correcting them. Part 2. How Meridian began. 6 years ago I was 25 and I had just had the worst performance review of my career. I was working as a junior accountant at a mid-size firm in Columbus. My manager, a man named Derek who had the energy of someone who peaked in a college fraternity and never recovered, told me that my problem was a lack of enthusiasm for the work. What Derek meant, I understood later, was that I had more ideas than he did and made him feel it. I had spent the previous quarter identifying a pattern in how the firm's government clients structured their procurement invoices, a systemic inefficiency that, if corrected, would save those clients approximately $2.3 million in billing errors annually. I'd written it up. I'd presented it. Derek had thanked me and filed it somewhere and then taken credit for a smaller version of the same observation 6 months later. I quit the following Monday. I want to be honest about what happened next. It was not triumphant. It was frightening in a way that I did not fully admit to anyone, including myself. I moved back into my parents' house for 3 months while I built the framework for what would become Meridian. My father made a comment at dinner every single evening about the importance of stable employment. My mother left job listings on the kitchen counter, printed from the internet with certain listings circled in pen. My sister was kind but busy. I had no one in that house who believed the thing I was trying to build was real. So I built it at night at the kitchen table after my parents went to bed. I taught myself federal procurement law from the ground up. I identified 3 underserved gaps in how mid-size government agencies manage their technology infrastructure contracts. Areas where the big consulting firms were too expensive and too slow, and where nothing adequate existed in the middle tier. I wrote a business plan. I applied for my first small business certification. I reached out to a woman named Patricia Huang, who had been 2 years ahead of me at Ohio State and who now worked as a procurement officer at a regional GSA office. Patricia had a reputation for identifying and mentoring emerging contractors who didn't have the connections to find the front door on their own. We had coffee. He read my plan. She was quiet for a long time, the way people are quiet when they're deciding whether to tell you the truth or the comfortable version. Then she said, "This is real. The gap you've identified is real. I can get you in front of the right people once. After that, it's entirely on you." "Once is enough," I said. She laughed. Later, she would tell me that was the moment she decided to back me. I left my parents' house 4 months after moving in, subletting a room from a graduate student in Columbus, and I did not tell my family when Meridian won its first contract, a $380,000 technology assessment contract with a regional Department of Transportation office. The contract felt enormous and terrifying and like the first real proof that the thing I had been building in my head was anchored to something solid. I did not tell them because I had learned by then what happened when you showed my father something before it was finished. He had an extraordinary ability to identify the distance between where something was and where it needed to be, and he could describe that distance so precisely that it felt like the space you were standing in was bottomless. I had watched him do it to Diane with her law school applications. I had watched him do it to my mother's garden. I had watched him do it to me reliably since I was 9 years old. So I decided, I would show him the finished thing or I would show him nothing. For 6 years I showed him nothing. Meridian grew by a specific and unglamorous mechanism. I did the work better than anyone else in my tier. I treated every contract as a proof of concept for the next one. And I built a reputation that traveled through procurement networks faster than any marketing budget could have carried it. By year 2 we had 8 contracts and 16 employees. By year 4, Patricia Huang had left the GSA and joined Meridian as our chief operating officer, a decision that accelerated our federal pipeline dramatically. By year 6 we were the firm. The life I built around Meridian looked, from the outside, from my family's outside, like modest stability. I drove the Honda because I genuinely didn't care about cars. I lived in a secure, unremarkable building because the security mattered and the appearance of it didn't. I deflected questions at family gatherings because the alternative was a conversation I wasn't ready to have on anyone else's terms. I had a dog named Coltrane, a large, dignified basset hound who believed the correct response to any human problem was extended physical contact, and who had been present for every significant moment in Meridian's history, asleep under my desk. I had a best friend named Jerome who had been my friend since freshman orientation at Ohio State and who knew every version of the story I'm telling you now. I had a running route along the Scioto River that I completed every morning at 5:45, and the river and the quiet and the first light on the water were the clearest thinking I did all day. I had, in other words, a life that was full and anchored and genuinely mine. My family's opinion of it was a weather pattern I had learned to read but no longer needed to shelter from. Until Tuesday. Until the phone call. Until my father's voice saying don't show up. Until something shifted in me that I hadn't felt shift in years. Part 3. The dinner I wasn't having. Thursday morning, 2 days after the call, I was in a meeting with Governor David Whitmore's chief of staff when my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Mom's telling the whole family you said you couldn't make it because you have a work thing. I stared at that for a moment. Then I typed back, got it. Thanks for the heads up. Governor Whitmore's chief of staff, a precise, carefully dressed woman named Sandra Kim, was explaining the parameters of an infrastructure digitization initiative that the governor's office wanted to bring to tender in Q1. It was the kind of contract that would represent, if awarded, the largest single engagement in Meridian's history. The governor's office had come to us specifically, Sandra explained, because of Meridian's track record on the regional DOT work and 2 subsequent state-level contracts we'd delivered under budget. The governor would like to meet with you personally before the formal RFP process opens, Sandra said. He has some specific vision for the project that he'd like to communicate directly to potential leads. I can make myself available, I said. Saturday works for him if that's not too short notice. He has a dinner that evening he'd like to keep, but he suggested, if you're available, joining him beforehand. He mentioned he enjoys Marcello's. I looked at Sandra Kim. I looked at her for what was probably 2 seconds longer than was normal. Then I said very calmly, Marcello's works perfectly for me. Later, walking back through our offices, Patricia fell into step beside me with the expression she wears when she's worked something out before I've said it. You're going to Marcello's Saturday, she said. The governor requested it. Your father's birthday dinner is Saturday. Also at Marcello's, yes. Patricia stopped walking. Natalie. Patricia. Did you engineer this? I thought about that honestly. The governor's office called me. Sandra Kim set the venue. I did not suggest Marcello's. But you didn't suggest a different restaurant. It's the governor's preference. Who am I to override the governor's preference? Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she started walking again and said quietly, make sure you call the restaurant ahead so they have the security details access requirements sorted before you arrive. Already done, I said. Part 4. What I wore. I want to tell you about the dress because it matters in ways that are hard to explain without it sounding like vanity, and it wasn't vanity. It was navy. Deep, almost dark enough to be black navy, structured at the shoulder, falling clean to just below the knee. I had bought it 8 months ago for a reception at the National Press Club in Washington, where I'd been introduced to 3 cabinet-level officials and a senator from Georgia who later became a client. It was not an expensive dress by the standard of the circles I now moved in. But it was the kind of dress that made people look at you the way you wanted to be looked at, as someone who had arrived, not someone who was trying to. I put on pearl earrings. Small single strand. The pearls had been my grandmother's, my father's mother, given to me at 17 with the instruction that I should wear them when I needed to remember who I came from. I wore them because I did genuinely need to remember that. Not as armor. As ballast. Jerome called while I was getting ready. Tell me you're not actually doing this, he said. I'm having dinner with the governor of Ohio, Jerome. It's a business meeting. At the same restaurant where your father is celebrating his 60th birthday at the same time in the same. I didn't choose the venue. You also didn't unchoose the venue. The governor. Natalie. Baby. I love you. We have been friends for 13 years. Please look me in the eye. A pause while he processed the fact that we were on the phone. Please hear me when I say, whatever happens tonight, you walk out of that restaurant with your dignity entirely intact. You do not gloat. You do not go looking for your father. You sit at your table, you conduct your meeting, and you let the universe do the rest. I looked at myself in the mirror. The dress. The pearls. Jerome, I said. When have I ever gloated? A very long pause. The time you sent Marcus Anderson a copy of the Forbes article after he told you your business plan was cute. That was professional correspondence. Natalie. I'll be dignified, I said. I promise. I meant it when I said it. Part 5. Marcello's. Marcello's is the kind of restaurant that has been in the same location for 40 years and has never needed to update its decor because the decor was correct the first time. Dark wood, white tablecloths, candles and hurricane glasses, a wine list that requires genuine knowledge to navigate. Carlo Marcello, the owner, is 73 years old, has been running the restaurant since his father passed it to him at 30. And maintains the particular dignity of someone who has been excellent at one specific thing for his entire adult life. Carlo also, as it happened, was the person who had catered the governor's economic summit 8 months ago, an event that Meridian had organized the logistics for. And in the process of that collaboration, Carlo and I had developed the easy, warm relationship of people who recognize in each other a shared understanding of what it means to build something carefully over a long period of time. I arrived at 6:45. The governor's security detail was already positioned. 2 agents in the lobby, one near the bar, one outside. Governor David Whitmore was already seated. A tall man in his late 50s with the unhurried manner of someone who has been powerful long enough that he no longer needs to perform it. Beside him was the city's mayor, Robert Chin, who had been scheduled to join for the early part of the dinner to discuss overlapping municipal and state interests in the infrastructure initiative. Carlo met me at the entrance personally. Ms. Osei Mensa. He took both my hands. Your table is ready. We have the burrolo you preferred from your last visit. Carlo, I said, you are consistently the most thoughtful person I know. He laughed, a genuine full laugh, and walked with me to the corner table. The governor stood when I approached, which he did not have to do and which I noted because it is the kind of thing you note. The mayor shook my hand warmly. I sat. Carlo himself poured the first glass. It was 6:52 p.m. My father's reservation was for 7 o'clock. Part 6. The entrance. I was mid-sentence, explaining Meridian's proposed approach to the state's legacy system migration, when I felt rather than saw the shift in the room. It is hard to explain this except to say that when you have spent your entire life being hyper-aware of a specific person's presence, your nervous system develops a calibration for it that bypasses conscious thought. I did not look up right away. I registered the sound of the front door, the murmur of the host, the particular quality of silence that spreads through a room when someone enters it, and the people already inside make a collective, unspoken recalibration. And then I looked up. My father stood at the entrance to Marcello's. He was wearing the charcoal suit he reserved for important occasions. I recognized it from his retirement dinner, from Diane's law school graduation. His hair, which had gone fully silver in the last 3 years, was freshly cut. He looked in every visible way, like a man who had arrived to be impressive. He was scanning the room the way he always scanned rooms, cataloging, assessing, identifying where in the hierarchy of tables and guests he was positioned. It was something I'd watched him do my entire childhood and had, somewhere in my 20s, recognized in myself before I trained it out. His eyes moved across the room, past the bar, across the center tables, to the corner, and stopped. I watched it happen. The scan halted. His expression, in the 2 seconds before he controlled it, did something I had never seen it do. It simply went blank. Not angry. Not dismissive. Blank in the way a document goes blank when someone deletes every word at once. Behind him, my mother entered. Then Diane in a red dress, her hand in the arm of a tall man I didn't know, the fiancé. Then my aunt and uncle. Then 2 of my father's colleagues from the engineering firm, men I'd met at Christmas parties throughout my childhood. My mother saw me at approximately the same moment that my father registered what he was seeing. Not just me but who I was sitting with. the governor of Ohio, the mayor of the city, the security detail flanking the table, Carlo Marcello, who had left and returned with a second bottle of wine and was speaking to me with the ease of a man addressing a valued regular. My mother's hand went to her chest. I did not look away. I did not perform surprise. I simply held my father's gaze from across the room and I waited. Governor Whitmore, who had been speaking, paused and followed my eye line. "Someone you know?" he asked. "My father," I said. "He's celebrating his birthday tonight." The governor turned, clocked the group at the entrance and in the generous, natural manner of a politician who has spent 30 years making people feel included, raised his hand in a wave. My father raised his hand back. He did it automatically. Before he could think. The reflex of a man who has spent his career being careful about who he acknowledged and how. He raised his hand to wave at the governor of Ohio waving at his daughter. Then his hand came down and I could see, even from the distance, the precise moment he understood the full shape of what he was standing inside. He moved toward my table. The security agent, a composed, broad-shouldered man named Agent Reeves, whom I had spoken with during the access briefing that afternoon, stepped forward. Not aggressively. Simply into the path. "Sir, this is a secured area for the duration of the governor's dinner. I'll need to ask you to return to your party." My father looked at Agent Reeves. Then at me. Then at the governor. Then back at Agent Reeves. My mother had reached his elbow. I could see her whispering something. Diane was still by the entrance with her fiancé and her expression. I knew that expression. It was the expression she wore when she was working very hard to appear as though everything was normal. My father said something to Agent Reeves that I couldn't hear. Agent Reeves said something back, calm and professional. And then Carlo Marcello appeared. Because Carlo sees everything in his restaurant, always. This is the 40-year proof of his excellence. And he said in a voice pitched for carrying without appearing to be raised, "Gerald. Welcome, welcome. Your table is ready. Wonderful evening for a celebration. If you'll follow me." And with the gentle, absolute authority of a man who has been managing difficult moments in his restaurant since before my father arrived in this country, Carlo turned my father's party toward their table. My father went. Because there was nothing else to do. I watched him take his seat at a table in the center of the room. His colleagues were already scanning the corner, reassessing. His colleague Raymond, a man I'd met at Christmas parties since I was 8 years old, leaned across and said something to my father. My father gave a short answer. Raymond looked at me with an expression I could not read from the distance but which contained no dismissal in it. I turned back to the governor. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. "Don't," the governor said. He was smiling in the way of someone who has just witnessed something that confirmed a prior opinion. "I've read your firm's profile, Natalie. I don't think interruptions are something that come easily to your table." "That's generous," I said. "It's accurate," he said. And we continued. Part 7. The weight of the evening. Here is what I did not expect. The grief. I had been prepared for the strangeness of the evening. I had thought through every version of the moment. What I had not prepared for and what arrived quietly and without announcement during the main course was the feeling of looking across a restaurant at my father's 60th birthday dinner. At the table he had chosen, the restaurant he loved, the family he had assembled, and feeling the full, complicated weight of what it meant that I was not at that table. Not because I had been excluded. I had been excluded before. I had survived the exclusion and built something extraordinary in the space it had cleared. It was something else. It was the recognition that even now, even with the governor on my left and the mayor on my right, even with the evidence of everything I had built arrayed around me, some part of me was still the girl who had wanted her father to look at her and see something worth keeping. I had not cried in a professional setting since I was 23. I did not cry now. But I held the feeling the way you hold something that is both heavy and yours, that you cannot put down and would not want to, and I let it settle. The mayor's phone buzzed. He checked it, offered his apologies and departed at 8:15. The governor and I continued for another 40 minutes, moving from the infrastructure initiative to broader questions about workforce development, about the particular challenges of scaling a minority-owned firm in the federal contracting space, about what the next 5 years might look like for Meridian. It was, stripped of its context, one of the most substantive professional conversations I had had in recent memory. At 9 o'clock, the governor's security lead signaled gently. Governor Whitmore stood, we shook hands and he said, My office will be in touch Monday to advance the formal process. I'm glad Sandra suggested Marcello's. So am I said. He left with his detail. Carlo brought coffee and a small plate of biscotti that I had not ordered and which were presented with the note. Compliments. CM. I sat alone at my corner table and drank my coffee. Across the room, my father's birthday dinner was entering its dessert course. I could see birthday candles being brought from the kitchen. I could hear, in the muted way of a full restaurant, the beginning of a song. I paid my bill. I put on my coat. I walked toward the exit. I did not walk by my father's table. I did not catch anyone's eye. I did not perform the exit for an audience. I was almost to the door when I heard my name. Natalie. It was Diane. She had left the table and was standing near the coat room, her red dress bright under the dim hallway light, her expression the specific one I had known all my life, the one that meant she was about to say something true even though it cost her. I stopped. I didn't know, she said. About the governor. About any of it. I just want you to know that. I know you didn't. She stopped. Started again. Dad is sitting at that table and he hasn't spoken in 40 minutes. Mom keeps trying to fill the silence and everyone else is just... They all know who was at that corner table. Nat Raymond looked it up on his phone. Dad's colleagues. They all know. I didn't say anything. Why didn't you ever tell us? She asked, and her voice was genuinely not accusatory. It was something rawer than that. Something closer to hurt. 6 years, Natalie. All of it. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about the honest answer. I thought about how to say it in a way that was true without being a weapon. Because, I said finally, I didn't want to need your father's approval to believe in what I was building. And I knew that if I told him while it was still in progress, I would. Diane was quiet. I needed it to be mine first, I said. Completely mine. Before anyone else got to have an opinion about it. She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with joy. He's going to want to call you, she said. I know. Are you going to answer? I picked up my coat. I thought about the contract on my desk. The 94 people who showed up to work every morning because of something I had built in a spare bedroom with $3,400 and a library book. I thought about my grandmother's pearls. I thought about the sound of the river at 5:45 in the morning and the way it looked when the light first hit it, and how the best thinking I ever did was moving through that light. Eventually, I said. But not tonight. I kissed my sister on the cheek. I walked out of Marcello's. The night air was cold and clear. Coltrane was at home waiting and Jerome had texted 4 times, and there was work to do in the morning. I walked to my car. I drove home. My father called 6 times between Sunday and Wednesday. I let each call go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty. I want to be precise about this because the line between justified distance and deliberate punishment is one I have thought about more than I can fully explain. It was not punishment. It was the simple acknowledgement that I was not yet ready to have that conversation in a way that would serve either of us, and that having it before I was ready would only mean performing a forgiveness I hadn't actually arrived at. On Wednesday evening he left a voicemail that was different from the others. It was 4 minutes long. He did not apologize directly. He is not a man who has ever found that word easily. But he said, I have been talking to Raymond. And to some other people. And I understand that I have not. I have not seen you correctly. For a long time. I do not know how to fix that. But I would like to try. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it. Patricia, who had been my COO for 2 years and who knew everything, listened to me describe the voicemail and said nothing for a long moment. Then, are you going to call him back? Yes. When? When I've finished figuring out what I actually want to say. Which is. I thought about my father at 22 arriving in a new country with an engineering degree and the absolute certainty that visibility was survival. I thought about what it costs a man to build a life in a place that did not automatically make room for him. I thought about how the tools you use to survive can become the tools you use on the people you love, without ever recognizing the difference. I want to say, I told Patricia slowly, that I understand why he is the way he is. And that it still hurt. And that I need him to hold both of those things at the same time. Patricia nodded. That's a hard thing to ask of someone. I know, I said. But it's the only version of the conversation I'm interested in having. 3 weeks after the dinner at Marcello's, The governor's office formally opened the RFP process for the infrastructure initiative. Meridian was among 4 firms invited to submit proposals. 6 weeks after that, we were awarded the contract. It was the largest in Meridian's history. Patricia cried, which she will deny. Jerome texted a string of emojis that took up half my screen. Coltrane was asleep under my desk as always and did not react. I called my father that evening. We talked for an hour. It was not a perfect conversation. It was not a healed one. He said things that were generous and things that were clumsy, and at least twice said something that was dressed in the language of pride, still the architecture of the old distance. I said things that were honest and one thing that was sharper than I intended. But at the end, before he hung up, he said, "I didn't know who you were, Natalie. That is on me." I sat with that for a while. "How you do," I said. And I meant it as a beginning, not an ending. Which is the only way I know how to mean it. Because this is the part they don't tell you about being invisible for a long time and then being seen. The seeing doesn't fix the years. It just opens a door that wasn't open before. Whether you walk through it and what you bring with you and what you have to leave on the other side, that part is still yours to figure out. Mine is still in progress. The river is still there in the morning. The light is still worth seeing. That for now is enough.